Hey, good evening, everyone. Another Tuesday evening live from Sheffield on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and Facebook, hopefully. So if you are on Facebook, if you can just give me a shout that you're on, hopefully I can see it somewhere. Oh, yeah, I'll be able to see it somewhere, and yeah, take it from there. But listen, I'm going to get straight into it this evening. I'm not sure where the sound engineer is, but I'm straight on it. So we're looking at, do you continually gaslight people? Beware, and there really is a big beware about it. So three things I'm looking at this evening is the plight of gaslighters. I want to look at hidden harm, and then for part one, looking at what you can do. And you might think, what on earth are you giving time to gaslighters for? Well, in terms of my profession, you still need to support people, whether they be the victim or the offender who wants to bring about a change. So my name is Delroy Hall. I'm a psychotherapist, trainer, and teacher. Good evening, Melissa. Thank you very much indeed. I've never met Melissa, but we've been having some really interesting conversations online. And if there's anyone, again, on Facebook, please let me know. I did send some invites out, but not too sure what's happening with Facebook at the moment. So I'm going to get into it. So gaslighters are manipulators, and they really do. They've spun some really difficult stories, and they've really put some people in a real spin. If you're here for the first time, welcome. If you're catching up during the week, welcome also. Gaslighters really are individuals who use psychological methods to cause you to question perception and to question your reality. You might say something and they'll say, well, I didn't hear it that way. No, you didn't say that. Or no, I said this, I meant this. So they really kind of twist people's heads around. So as well as I was looking at the work of the impact of gaslighters on individuals, I thought to myself, well, what happens to gaslighters? Because I don't believe that if you peddle badness, that you go away scot-free. You may get away scot-free in the moment, but what's the cumulative effect for people who gaslight, people who do bad things to other people? So, you know, for me, the question was, what is the long-term effect of lying? I know that lying, there is a physiological, psychological, emotional response when we start to lie. Our body changes, but I want to say something a bit more about that in a moment. Also, you could say, well, some people say what goes around comes around, or karma, or what you sow you should reap, all these type of things. And sometimes if we're waiting for that, we have to wait a really long time to see the person's comeuppance. And it does happen often. Sometimes we have to wait a long time. One of the things I said to a friend recently, when there is the demise of the individual, you and I are no longer on the scene, so we can't be blamed for what exactly happens to them. So tonight we're looking at the plight of gaslighters, hidden harm, and then if you're somebody you know you've been gaslighting, you kind of got one eye on this, because I do think, as I kind of work through this, some individuals realize that what they're doing is wrong, but sometimes getting off the hamster wheel is really difficult. So this session tonight and hopefully next week, we'll be looking at what individuals can do if you want to bring about a change. And you can, but it takes a bit of courage to do that. Okay, so there's the gradual impact. Psychologist by the name of Ben Bonetti said this: every lie chips away at the liar's trust in themselves. So they're peddling the stuff, but there's something going on in them. Thank you, sound engineer. Over time, he says, consistent lying leads to an identity crisis. An identity crisis is a period of uncertainty and insecurity in a person's life. So over time, it leads to an identity crisis, a confusion between the real self and the deceptive self, one portrays to the other. This dichotomy, this split, can lead to self-esteem issues, feelings of guilt, and diminished sense of self-worth. So listen. Oh, right. Somebody said I'm blurry. You know, I've looked at this thing already. Let me have a look. Settings. Camera. Let me just go back to this. Ooh, right. See if that's okay. If it is, just let me know. I think I'm going to have to invest in a new camera or something like that. Anyway, hoping that's better. Please let me know. Oh, yeah, good evening on Facebook. Really good to, it actually works. Goodness me. Thank you, Sonia. So So as I said, the quote is worth unpacking. So let me just read the quote again. Every lie chips away at the liar's trust in themselves. Over time, consistent lying leads to an identity crisis, a confusion between the real self and the deceptive self one portrays to others. This dichotomy can lead to self-esteem issues, feelings of guilt, and diminished sense of self-worth. In one sense, whether you understand creation or design or evolution, we are, thank you, Melissa. Brilliant, thank you. We are certainly not made to be incongruent, because the body doesn't react well when we are incongruent. If we're looking at the idea of quantum physics, everything's connected, you can't then say a lie and there's no impact on the body. If you want to look at Newtonian physics, which talks about, good evening, Ray, really good to see you this evening. If you want to talk about Newtonian physics, which talks about, I think one of the laws of action is to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you lie, if you spin deceit, there is a kind of negative aspect to that, and that quite often is contained within our bodies. So one of the things, of course, when you gaslight people, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Things happen. You gaslight an individual, you're affecting the family, the team that an individual works for. So nothing happens in a vacuum. However, the inner harm is not apparent. You and I are don't see what's taking place. We receive the insult, the ridicule, but we don't see what's taking place inside the individual that's spinning the lies. As I said before, we know from medical, from science, from neuroscience, that when we lie, that things happen in the body. Listen what neuroscience says. Lying changes the brain. So we don't see it. This for me, this thing kind of hidden harm. It changes the brain. In neuroscience, a study of the amygdala, the part that kind of deals with emotions, emotional responses, the more we lie, the more that part of the brain doesn't respond well. So in a sense, it's almost like we're self-censoring kind of sensitivity. So the more we lie, it changes the brain and affects a part of the amygdala, the part that controls emotional responses. So in a sense, lying almost self-censors who we are. So this is some of the consequences of gaslighting. There's loads. I've just picked a few. But let me tell you now, none of it is good. It's not good at all. I know the pain that people feel, the resentment and the anger, but there's stuff going on in the individual who is doing the gaslighting. One of the things, of course, is the erosion of self. What do I mean? Consider these 2 points. First, habitual lying causes a huge disconnect between who you are and the false persona that you're inflicting on others. So there's a real self and there's this kind of false self, and you're inflicting the false self on others. Over time, the management of these different personalities injures one's sense of self, leading to inner confusion, almost to the point whereby the individual who's gaslighting you in public, behind closed doors, asking the question, who am I? Now, that's a crazy place to be in. There are consequences to people that are gaslighting, but quite often the emphasis, quite rightly so, is given to the victim and those who've been harmed by the individual. Okay, thank you for the emoji, Saf. So one of the things I've said, that juggling these different selves is exhausting, even if you have not done a hard day's work. Now, let me give you an example. I might have shared this as example before, but in my counseling practice, one of the things I say to individuals, when there's kind of real self, and what people have done over a period of time or years, they've created this kind of false self to deal with stuff. And then I say to them, at the end of the day, are you exhausted? They said, yeah, I'm exhausted, even if I've not done any work. And I said, do you know why that is? No. What happens? There's stuff going on inside of us, and we sit on it, and sitting on it uses energy, and we're using energy to kind of keep this stuff going and sitting on some other stuff. So at the end of the day, we're tired. And one of the things that happens in therapy, if you work with people consistently and long enough, this kind of false self kind of not supposed to disintegrates, but it's kind of pushed to one side, and the real self comes forward. People then have more energy for creation, for new ideas. End of the day, they're not tired. Obviously, it takes some time, but this energy is expended in keeping crap down, basically, and that's what happens. Secondly, so first thing is habitual lying causes a huge disconnect. Second, there's a loss of the person's authenticity, meaning they struggle to be real in relationships and how they see themselves. So already, I've just started on one thing. You can see that people who are gaslighting, they're not getting away scot-free. They really, really don't. So, so what happens in terms of what happens to individuals, this kind of lack of authenticity leads to a lack of purpose, feeling of emptiness, and I suspect that sometimes fear being found out. And I want to say a little bit about feelings of emptiness. The feelings of emptiness is quite often linked to people who've got borderline personality disorder. It's a kind of mental health condition affecting how people see themselves and how they interact with other people. And it makes it very hard for them to function on a day-to-day basis. Quite often, what I've discovered, and I could be wrong in terms of my working with people with personality disorder, they've had trauma in their early years and it was never resolved. It was, they never got the treatment, and they never got the intervention. So they've kind of grown up functioning in a way that's not helpful. So characteristics of individuals in this kind of feeling of emptiness is impulsive, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and all manner of kind of psychological kind of disabilities. So it ain't good, even though you might be on the receiving end. I can't remember how the film ends, gaslighting, but it backfires. The husband tries to cause his wife to go into sanity, but it backfires, and then he ends up really ends up in a mess, even though he was trying to outdo his wife. If lying changes the brain, then there is a knock-on effect then in the body, and the gaslighter it's not seen, but it's felt that something is happening inside him. He or she may not know, but something is happening. And when things happen, quite often happen very gradually, we don't notice. But over a period of time, people then can start to feel certain things. So number 2 is emotional destruction or emotional consequences. So what do I mean? Lying and manipulation evokes feelings of guilt and shame. Remember, guilt is, I've done something wrong, I shouldn't have done that. Shame is, I am wrong, I'm bad, I'm no good, I am unlovable. And it's shame that is the most difficult thing to kind of work with. Over time, these emotions become really difficult to manage. So somebody can start off really easy, gaslighting people. And remember, I said last week that one of the things about gaslighting, people have to remember the lies and the webs of deceit they've spun. So you can imagine trying to remember all this stuff. It takes a lot of energy. And then what happens, people then start to think, I can't remember what I said. And then what gaslighters do, they say one thing, and then when somebody comes back to them, they'll say, no, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that at all. Even if it's minuted, they will say, I never said that at all. I recall, in terms of emotional, I remember when I was kind of putting some notes together, I remembered there was a guy who was having an affair, and he went to the doctor hoping that the doctor would give him a prescription to deal with his conscience about having an affair. Come alive, mate, stop the affair. There's no way a doctor's going to give you something to kind of deal with your guilt and shame of having this affair. Number 3 is severe damage to relationships, as you can imagine. And I would say relationship to oneself and relationship to other people. Really, this is a no-brainer, isn't it? The gaslighter will experience significant loss and trust of feelings, and also then of isolation due to his or her manipulative behavior. Also, they can't be trusted. So there's 2 things that happen. As the gaslighter spins their web of lies and deceit, there is something about them that withdraws, but also people withdraw from them because they can't be trusted. And those of us who've been on the receiving end, if somebody says to you, you can't be trusted, that's a very wounding comment to be making. And when we hear those comments, you can't be trusted, they're not words. It really cuts deep into you. So if you're here just for a moment, just want to say welcome. I hope you're getting something from this. If you know somebody who's a gaslighter, gaslighters don't often go and seek help. There's something I'm going to say right at the end. You might say, Delroy, I think you're really being a bit hard about this, but I'm going to say it anyway towards the end in terms of what gaslighters can do. But if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please, either LinkedIn, I can see it, Facebook, I can see it, and YouTube, and I can see it. If anything's relevant to the session that we're looking at this evening, or of course, as some people do, they contact me outside of the broadcast. So there's destruction in relationships, and oh yeah, all right, okay. I actually think if it's the same person, I've got something from. Oh no, this is something else. I thought somebody had contacted me on one of these social media platforms. So there's emotional destruction, severe damage to relationships, and obviously you're withdrawing, people withdrawing from you. There's a whole thing of self-esteem, and your self-worth is dwarfed. It diminishes as you continue to deceive people. There will be at some point, and one of the things, I think all of us listening, whether live or on catch up, we've all done something that behind closed doors we wish to goodness we'd not done it. We wish it not happened. That is a part of being human. And what happens to people who consistently gaslight? Behind closed doors, there can be a growing, now this is horrible, there can be a growing sense of self-disrespect, and also the lowering of one's self-esteem. Behind closed doors, behind the bravado, behind the toxic words, there's this kind of self that really is being kind of diminished, not by an external thing, but by how the gaslighter is interacting with other people. We are not designed or made or created, whatever word you want to use, we are not made in that way to live like that, to be interacting with people like that for a long period of time. Here is one thing. The gaslighter could be somebody who's successful, but underneath that success is insecurity and shame. I've worked long enough to know, I remembered in my early days of counseling, there's a young woman that came in and she was stunning, hair in the right place and she taught yoga and Reiki and loads of other things, and I was thinking, well, why is she here? All this stuff, really good at it. And then she broke down in tears. She said, Delroy, my life is a mess. So the external stuff, she was doing the yoga, and this before mindfulness, yoga, Reiki, and I think there's a few other things, all the kind of things that you think that somebody's life is kind of well put together. But she said, Delroy, she broke down in tears. I was thinking, why is she here? Because she's doing everything that, that gives the idea that everything's okay. But then she broke down and said, Delroy, my life is a mess. I don't know what's happening to me. And we continued doing some work. The other thing that can happen with the person who's gaslighting is behavioral changes. Lying, that's one part of it, but there's behavioral changes in personality. And then what can happen to individuals, the more they lie, this is what can happen. There's a detachment from reality. And in some instances, believe it or not, some of the individuals start to believe their own lies. It's incredible what can happen over a period of time. And sometimes, part of me is quite cross because some of these organizations, they know what individuals are doing. I recall, I might have mentioned before, a friend of mine who was really badly treated, off work, sick for 2 years, and then they kind of pensioned her off because she was so unwell. And they knew that her manager was a really difficult individual. But it was just a case of, well, we can't do anything about it. And she was allowed to continue creating mayhem. So sometimes these workplaces, they know what's taking place and they decide not to do anything whatsoever. So as you can imagine, what I've looked at before, this whole thing around erosion of self, emotional difficulties, damage to relationships, damage to self-esteem, self-worth, behavioral changes, and obviously, no-brainer, mental health issues. Over a period of time, the person can, so what's happened, they're lying, it creates stress in the body. And over a period of time, what can happen There's a kind of detachment from reality, and there can be a sense of paranoia. What's the paranoia about? Being found out. And we know of individuals who hide secrets, and there's this fear of being found out. So individuals can't function. And I suspect dealing with that tension, sometimes people can turn to drugs, alcohol, ways of behaving to anesthetize the pain that they're experiencing, because there's a real disconnect. There's an incongruence between how they're living and what's actually happening on the inside. Of course, there's spiritual and existential decline, where people can actually look at themselves and really ashamed of where they are. And of course, there can be a decline in moral and ethical behavior. The individual is so steeped up in it, there is a massive decline in moral and ethical behavior, which then can lead individuals to be involved in more unethical and immoral behavior, which normally they wouldn't have done. But they've started going down this path, and it's as though this gate has been opened, and it's a slippery slope into this place of immoral and unethical behavior. So I could say loads more in terms of what happens to the someone who's a gaslighter. But I want to say this. Whether somebody's watching, you know that you gaslight. You're not making any comment on this. You know that things are really, really difficult. Now, this is a choice. This is one or two, well, maybe three things. Either you found out and you're exposed. That's one. Number two, you realize what you're doing, and then you want to do something about it, and you can. Number three, which is the worst, is that, and I said earlier on that you might think I'm being harsh. For some people, one of the best things that can happen to them is they have a breakdown. And I don't mean a meltdown where they cry for a couple of days. They have a full-blown psychological meltdown. I guess in some cases, some would have psychosis, nervous breakdown. Delroy, why have you said that? This is the reason why. If you're healthy and functioning, you don't get a nervous breakdown. You just don't. When people have a nervous breakdown, something is going on. We can't live months and years with a huge disconnect and nothing not happens to us. So the breakdown gives the individual the opportunity to rebuild their life on truth and honesty. A bit like the 12 steps program. I'll be coming to that in a moment. The first thing is honesty. And I recall talking to my one of my tutors when I was training 30 years ago, and she said, Delroy, sometimes for some people, one of the best things that can happen to them is having a nervous breakdown. So I said, Tamara, why? Because, for me, the nervous breakdown is a bad thing and all the rest of it. She says, what can happen? It gives the individual the opportunity to rebuild their life on truth. Now, I'll say this, that very few people can work through a nervous breakdown on their own. Very, very few. In fact, I know people who've done it, but but for me, they never ever seem right. But I know people who've had significant meltdowns and in the hand of a psychologist or a therapist, and they've stayed with them maybe for 2 or 3 years to reconstruct their life, reconstruct their values, be more real, put stuff away that's been problematic and the way that they've lived. And that can be really, really helpful in them being able to live a much better life. So these are some of the things that you can do. I'm going to touch on a few things today. We've only got a few more minutes, but I'm going to say a little bit more. And the reason why I'm going to say and do some now, more next week, giving a person who is offending the opportunity to come clean. I think the work that I've done and other therapists do, that people come and people can come in some real bad states. They know they've been dishonest. They know they've lied. They've cheated their way through business, and it's caught up with them. They can't sleep. They can't function. They're having nightmares, recurring dreams. Marriages are falling to bits, and all the rest of it. And they've known that they've not been living congruently. They've not been living honestly, and it catches up with us at some point. One of the things I will say, is that as I was looking through this, I listened to a YouTube video, broadcast recently, and there was somebody was being interviewed as CEO. They brought a consultant into a company in America, and when the consultant did the work, the conclusion was that the CEO was the problem in the organization, a big organization. He was the CEO, but what the board did, they didn't get rid of him. And when he said to his wife, "Oh, I can't believe what they said, blah, 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 blah," and she said, "Well, I've been telling you for 20 years. It's correct." So what the organization did, they didn't get rid of him. He had coaching and he was in therapy for 2 years. And they said you would never, ever believe, in fact, people told him, they would never believe he was the same individual. The organization changed, profits grew because he did the number one thing. When he heard what the consultant said, he took, and this is for the gaslighter, and if anything that we need to do in our lives, we need to take 100% responsibility. You're not a gaslighter because your company said you should, or your manager said you should. You've taken on that role for a whole range of reasons, which I might come to in a moment. So acknowledging your behavior is absolutely essential if you want to change your ways, if you want to be different. Take 100% responsibility. Be honest and admitting that you've hurt people. And I was thinking, I've got my daughters are 29 years old now, and they'll tell you I'm not a perfect dad. But if you ask them, what did dad do when you were younger? There were times when either I'd heard half the story, I wasn't honest, not so honest, I wasn't fair with them. Sometimes I got the wrong end of the thing, and I was quite sharp with them. And I could see that what I'd said had hurt them. And I would say to them, Saffron Jordan, whatever it was, I realize what I've said, I've hurt you. This is what I said, and I'm sorry for saying it. And so you're not just saying sorry. Sometimes when people get really upset and people just say sorry, what you're saying sorry for, you need to specify what you're saying sorry for. Don't just say, I'm sorry. Specify what you're being sorry for. One, it releases you off the hook, and also gives the possibility of the other person to feel released as well. So you specify what you're being sorry for. So number one, acknowledge your behavior. Number two, understand the harm you've done to other people. Because of your gaslighting, people have lost their jobs. People have been demoted. People have got mental health issues. People maybe can't function in their families, and they can't function in relationships because of what you have done. Understand the harm that you have done to people. Don't just say sorry and the work sends you on a kind of 2-hour workshop on a more effective communication. No. Either the manager, the supervisor, the welfare officer, or occupational health. And I'm not saying that you need to do it in an email or when there's a big team meeting, you stand up and you say, my name's Delroy Hall and I'm an addict and I'm a gaslighter. I'm not saying that at all. But acknowledge, take 100% responsibility, but acknowledge the harm that you've done to individuals. Number three, I'm going to stop here as well. There's loads more. I'm going to say more for next week. Explore the roots of why you gaslight others. Now, to do this is going to take a bit of courage. It's going to take some honest introspection. And I recall in not my early days, but right throughout my work as a leader, sometimes people are very critical, can be very critical. And one of the things I learned, that in that criticism contains a grain of truth. And part of your work as a leader is to find out what that grain of truth is. But in terms of the gaslighter, it's going to take some real honest introspection. Why have you been gaslighting other people? Quite often around that, there's something around insecurity, a need for control, a desire to avoid accountability, blame shifting, pointing the finger at other people. So finding out why is really important. And that will take a bit of probing. that will take some probing. Some of us can do quite well with pen and paper. We really kind of probe things. That is one of my strengths. And I stay with things until I find why I behaved in a particular way. What is it about me that kind of responded? But also, for sometimes we need the intervention of a professional listener, a therapist or psychologist, and we need to find out what are some of the underlying issues. Let me say this: if you're a gaslighter, or if you know people that gaslight, let me just say this one fact: they weren't born that way, but over the years they've acquired a way of being, and quite often it's been a way of being to survive, quite often the home. There's something I was talking, something I was saying to somebody recently, and it just came out of my mouth: the myth of family. Some folks come from horrendous families, and the way of surviving in the family was maybe to tell lies, to tell stories, to deny things, to hear one thing, say to the other. So one of the things, sometimes when people come for therapy, I say to individuals, the way that you functioned was a means of survival. That strategy is no longer relevant. Now it's not time to find another strategy. That's what happens in short-term work. But in long-term work, let's replace this short-term strategy with a more wholesome way of dealing with things. So let me give an example. When some people, one of the things I ask people, how do you deal with anger? And some people, of course, when they're angry, they rip the door off the hinges, they throw cups, and they throw the mobile phones. I remember somebody who had 3 or 4 mobile phones, because when they lost it, they just slung it and all the rest of it. And this is what I would say. So there was never any judgment. So this is what I would say. They smash cups, throw pots, smash windows, break things. This is what I ask. What is it that you're trying to say that you're not able to say in words? And then there's a process of helping the individual to deal with anger more healthily, more wholesome. So instead of throwing objects, over a period of time, you create the space, a secure space, that somebody then can begin to talk about their anger and not react as they have done in time past. So they respond, and they kind of make the contact through words. And then over a period of time, the throwing stops, and they express what their needs and wants are without getting angry. So I've only got to number 3. There's loads more, and I want to give time to individuals who have a destructive way of interacting with people. So that's it for today. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Please, more than happy for you to contact me outside of the session. Hope you find it useful. If you found it useful, and you know friends are going through difficult times, forward it, share it with individuals. I'm certainly open for 1 hour free consultation. There you'll get a chance to, for the 1 hour, we'll explore some things, and then it'll give you the opportunity to know whether you want to work with me or not. I never ask you for a decision there and then. I don't want to put people on the spot, but I say to individuals, if you want to work with me, contact me, either text me or call me or send me an email, and then we can set something up. So it's 1 hour free consultation where you can begin to explore and decide whether you and I are a good fit to be able to work together. So I wish you well. Enjoy the rest of your evening and the rest of your week. It's chucking it down the rain now. It was really bright at one time, and it's really dark and it's raining now. So wherever you are, hope you're well and keep safe. All the best. Take care now, and thank you for watching. Wherever you are, thank you. After this, gaslight should be extinct. I'm not too sure about that, but anyway, thank you much indeed. And if you know somebody who's, well, maybe somebody's confided in you, that they realize that they're not handling things very well, send them the video and then ask them to log in for next week. Great stuff. Listen, fantastic. Look after yourself. Take care and all the best. Bye-bye.